Really glad to welcome you to the session on narratives on Tathya. We have a great panel here today. We have Amish Tripathi, who now heads the Nehru Center in London. We have Manoj Ladwa, well-known lawyer, runs India Inc., again based out of London. And of course, we have the incorrigible Anand Ranganathan, who's decided to attend a session on anti-colonialism in a suit. The the interesting format with today is there are no moderators. This is just a conversation. We start with a quick 1 minute introduction of a big idea on our topic, which is new narratives reversing a colonial gaze. From there, we move on into a 20-minute discussion on ideas, thoughts, actionables, and deliverables. And then we have a quick wind up. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Amish. So let's go in the order of the screen you see here: Amish, Manoj, Anand, and then myself. So your one big idea, Amish: how do we reverse a colonial gaze?
Look, I think the biggest problem is decolonizing our own minds. So many of us Indians in India and Indians indeed abroad as well, still see our own land from a colonial perspective. So, for example, many Indians believe that India wasn't a nation and the British Raj created it, which is utter nonsense. It's not true. There are enough texts from the Vishnu Puran, ancient texts, which refer to India as a cultural nation. Anyway, the concept of a nation state came with the Westphalian system, which is only 200, 300 years old. Our concept of looking at ourselves as a loser nation which kept repeatedly losing to invaders. Again, there's a colonial narrative. The actual truth is that India is the toughest nation around, because we are the only pre-Bronze Age culture which is still alive. Every single other pre-Bronze Age culture surrendered to the invaders. There were two groups essentially, Turks and Europeans, who wiped out all pagan cultures across the world. Again, we actually believe those colonial narratives. We do not know our own narratives when it comes to, I'm not just talking about our ancient traditions in terms of spirituality, but in proper knowledge systems, science, maths, navigation. Damascus steel was actually invented in India. Surgery did actually happen in ancient India. Many of these gems of knowledge we actually don't know. So the first step, if we want to change the colonial narrative, is we have to decolonize ourselves first. It should be done ideally through the education system, through the government. But look, it's a big task. We are fighting back 800 years of of suppression. So all of us need to push back.
I'd like to pick up on Amish's point, and I couldn't agree more about decolonizing ourselves. And as somebody that has been born and brought up in the UK, that has gone through the English education system, I think the fascination or preoccupation with colonialism and the Raj is more in India than it is here in the UK. And I know that, having gone through the education system here, the issues of empire and colonialism are issues of the past. They're not a preoccupation here, but I see that more and more as a preoccupation in India. And so my big point I want to make is that we all come from a broadly similar background on this panel, where we believe that on balance, this the current government and the current narratives that are being setting are broadly good for India. We may have our different nuances, but I fear that there's a danger that we may fall into where we're adopting the narratives of the West. Words such as progressive and liberal, left and right, nationalist and versus patriot. These have different weightages in the West, but we're using those same idioms and those same terminologies to describe some of the events and decisions of that are going on in India. And I think we need to come out of that particular mindset. For example, a lot of what has happened over the last 6 years, in my view, has been extremely progressive and extremely liberal, whether it's on issues of climate change, on women's empowerment, on the abolition of triple talaq, and so on. These are progressive and liberal idioms. Similarly, this whole left and right debate, we need to move away from that, because frankly, the weightage of left and right in politics and in the West is completely different from what it is in India. So again, along with decolonizing ourselves, part of that process has to be to look at the terminologies that we use again, because that has a big impact upon how others view us.
Yeah, first of all, thanks very much, Anuraag, for having me. It's really it's a privilege to be in an esteemed company. And I do agree, I think, wholeheartedly with what Amish said about the continuity of our civilization, Indian civilization, and to a very large extent to what Manoj said about the labels that people put very freely, left wing, right wing. I think the problem stems, and since you asked for one big idea that we can debate, and all of us have given those ideas, I think for me, I think the problem stems from just one word: selectivity, and the fear of not being objective. And where does that stem from? I think, we believe what we see, but more often than not, what we see is written by those who see what they believe. And what they believe is, their ideology or their politics or their friends or where they would like to be or where they would like to see their country to be. And when I say at the heart lies the selectivity, it stems ironically from, I think most of the narratives that are peddled nowadays are increasingly less so by books and writers, but more so by journalists. They're all over the place. And I think there ought to be more, while there ought to be more journalism in science to let us decide on various topics that are very important for nation building, GMO and space science and all that, I think there ought to be more science in journalism as well. And I think that's the heart of the thing, that what science teaches you, A, is humility, B is objectivity, C is prior citation. So if you cannot progress, you cannot write a scientific paper without having references, so which means prior citations. Now, in every narrative that we've seen in the last 7 years that's been peddled, that column or that subtopic of references is entirely missing. You can pick up anything. Fake church attacks, you would talk endlessly about it without giving prior citations to what was happening during the UPA. You would talk about mob lynchings without giving prior citations to what. So everything is as if almost it gives the impression that it's happening for the first time. It's almost as if in 2014 there was this Cambrian explosion, and everything that could go wrong with India started to go wrong. Before 2014, everything was Garden of Eden, and nothing of the sort. If you look at, for example, freedom of speech and expression, the stifling of it, and every issue. Everything has been done and dusted before Modi came to power. And just to pick up loosely, and I'm sure we'll probably debate more on this, what Manoj said about the labels, left wing, right wing, I entirely agree. In fact, I've said this before, that to me, more appropriate than right wing or left wing is whether one is social Darwinian or not social Darwinian, because that is the most dangerous aspect. That people have misappropriated, if I may say so, from Darwin's theory of evolution. That is the misreading. That is increasingly for the right wing, survival of the fittest. That is what has actually given birth to empires, and we can talk about Churchill and all. And B, what the left wing takes from it, which is this thing about rationalizing suffering. That is what we are doing it for you, for the greater good. And these are mottled concepts that have been completely misappropriated from Darwin's theory, where one of the greatest evolutionary endowments, more than survival of the fittest and adaptation, is actually empathy. And people, whenever they talk of Darwin's theory, they talk of survival of the fittest, which is one half of it. The other half of it, that would have been impossible without empathy towards other people, towards other living beings, so on and so forth. So I think these are the concepts that we must bring more science and the way science is conducted into our narrative, and I think things would probably fall into place.
In fact, it's amazing. I would take off exactly from where you left off, which is we need more science, we need more repeatability, reliability, provability in narratives, as versus just an opinion piece that, hey, as a woman I feel unsafe and therefore India is unsafe, or you have a Salam Bombay and a slumdog billionaire, which goes out and say, hey, India is filthy, so you end up saying, hey, it's filthy. And that's exactly what data reveals is set out to do, which is to say, hey, listen, let's look at crime data and then build a narrative on how safe or unsafe women are. Is it an India issue? Is it a patriarchy issue? Let's look at per capita, plastic waste or air pollution or whatever, and then let's get to a conclusion that India is filthy. I mean, you look at Lord of the Rings and you imagine New Zealand to be this really pristine, clean place. You watch Slumdog Millionaire and everything seems to be a gutter, and that's how these perceptions are formed, and that's precisely what we'd like to change. But I think, more importantly, and I'm just going to agree with Manoj's point here. And this is something I deeply care about. I write about it as well, that the whole idea of othering, left versus right, progressive versus conservative, liberal versus, whatever, the whole idea of othering is perhaps the most dangerous export from the Western world, which we as Indians, or might I say even Asians, have bought into. I mean, I live in Singapore, and I can see all of us in India, and Thailand, and Singapore, and Malaysia living with a whole bunch of contradictions. As an example, I wear a kalaba and rudraksh, and interestingly, I use a Blackpink mouse because that's my daughter's favorite band, and both of these can coexist. And that, unfortunately, is something that, the whole idea of India being a land of contradictions, where India needs to shun Western construct, Western labels, Western othering, and propose our own models, is something that to me is very interesting. If we could, guys, spend a quick 10 minutes on purely on an actionable perspective. Let's say, you could have people from media, you could have people from government watching the show, or let's just say an average citizen, or it could be an NRI, a PIO for that matter. How do you think we can overcome the idea of labeling, the idea of being of rejecting our past and the glory from it, or the idea of preferring arts over science when it comes to how narratives are built. So whichever order you guys want to go in, how do you think we actually overcome this challenge?
Okay, sorry, go. Okay, go ahead, Manoj.
Okay, Anurag, if I come in here, look, this is something that we need to really take a step back, first of all, and sort of realize that, look, the trap that I think all of us are recognizing is that we're moving into a world with instant press a button and something happens, and therefore one tweet means that I've solved the problems of the world. And that absolutism that also Anand referred to, and we've all been talking about, we need to get away from that and think much more long term. And when I say long term, ultimately it rests upon institution building. And the one thing of colonialism that if we are to take something from it, is the investment in building institutions, whether it's in terms of governance or business, or in our case, media institutions. Whether you look at the BBC or other platforms around the world, they have set these narratives based upon economic and strategic interests of the countries from which they've been. India has not invested in building narrative-setting institutions. Now, and just to my final point on this is that I don't subscribe to this is biased and this is unbiased. Everybody has a perspective. And I think that is the Indian philosophical position, that we present perspectives and we allow other perspectives. Bias, non-bias, that's not of, that's a trivial issue for me. So building strong institutions, whether it's in terms of training of journalists, whether it's in terms of building media platforms that have got a global outlook. That's where I think a lot of the investment now needs to take place.
And it's
If
very
I
interesting
can,
if you remember. Sorry, Amish, I'm butting in just 10 seconds. Manoj, if you remember the last panel discussion we were on, and I find that's something fascinating. And just to refer people to what you're doing now, and back then, there's a whole bunch of us that would go and complain about this media house is biased and that media house is unfair and they have an agenda and what have you. But it's fascinating. You've gone out and and set up India Inc. Dushman ke ghar pe ghus ke waar karenge. So sitting in the UK, you've said, listen, here is somebody that will tell our stories in our language, in our terms, and for our strategic interest. And I think it's fascinating to look at this challenge from a solution perspective, rather than a whining or a cringing kind of point of view. So I think it's fascinating, and thank you for doing what you do. Sorry, Amish, I butt in, but yeah, please go ahead.
So I just want to add, three quick things. One is that part of the Western confidence, in what everyone has a bias, right? There is no one truth, not in the Indian way, not at least among us human beings. One truth is only at the divine level, right? The confidence of the Western world comes in their belief in one truth, that their bias is the one truth, and all of us are worshippers of false gods, right? We try and argue from their paradigm. We have to put that key paradigm across. There is no one truth. There is your bias and there's my bias. There's my truth and there's your truth, and we have to present our point of view. Even their liberalism comes with a universal perspective that their truth is the truth. That's one aspect. It's a deeper philosophical aspect. Two more key things that I want to add is data is important, right? Especially when one is arguing at an academic level, at an opinion maker level, hopefully even at a think tank level. But at a mass level, what works is storytelling, right? Data bores people out. There's a reason why Western media is able to get its narratives out. They realize the importance of picking one story and building a narrative out of it. This is something that we have to learn, how to communicate stories. There's a reason why fiction books sell so much more than non-fiction books, often, right? Stories work a lot more. We have to learn that. Data is important. I'm not denying it. Do it only at the opinion maker level, at the academic level. We shouldn't remove the importance of stories even in journalism. That's what actually creates narratives. And the third thing that in my mind is critical is that when we go out to communicate, we must look. We are not so big that we can communicate to the entire world, right? We have to pick our markets, which then cascade down. And here I want to point out the importance of the Anglophone world. There's a reason why the Chinese have invested so much money in Hollywood movies and not in French movies, even though French movies are better, right? Because most of the world does not watch French movies, they watch Hollywood movies. You impact the Anglophone world, it cascades down to the entire world. So you have to focus your narrative efforts. And within those countries, there are 4 or 5 cities which decide their cultural memes. So we have to focus our efforts, and also within that, this whining and hyper aggression does not work. It has to be quiet confidence. It has to be calm. It has to be the way this conversation is happening. Confident, but not unnecessarily hyper aggressive, shouting, screaming. That doesn't work.
Okay, so hyper aggressive shouting, screaming obviously takes us to Anand.
I was just about to say I was feeling a bit out of place out here. What's going on? We have a panel where no one's heckling, no one's interrupting. I mean, this is ridiculous. No, but may I? In fact, I had set out to, before Amish, had his say, to give just 2 examples, one of Ambedkar and one of Churchill. But may I, before I do that, may I please disagree with my good friend Amish when he says that everyone has biases and there is no one truth. It is true everyone has biases, but everyone need not have biases. And I for one, believe that there is only one truth. So,
there are facts. There are facts.
Yeah.
But one truth in terms of the interpretation of that, at least in the Indian way, all of us are triggered by. But oh, sorry. I'll not interrupt.
But
I will
also,
not. I will not do the
okay.
TV thing. Sorry.
No, but Anand, I'm going to complicate. I'm going to complicate with whatever you're saying. So let's go back to the foundation of psychology and psychiatry. So whether it's Carl Jung, whether it was Carl Rogers who said it. Now the whole idea is, look, we agree with you on facts, but then there's this whole angle of evaluative beliefs, archetypes, memes,
Which is what makes the
upbringing,
truth.
culture. Yeah. So you and I could see an orangutan, but it could mean very different things to us. So yeah. So Amish and I, now that we've complicated whatever you were going to say,
Yes.
please.
So if you were to bring in that, if you were to bring in that perspective of, or I would say a new definition of truth, then what you say is right, because what you mean is truth is a composite of opinion, perspective, and things of that sort. For me, truth is fact. I mean, I've said this before. I'm not much of a fan of gray. I'm a fan of black and white, because I think being gray lends a bit of hypocrisy to what you believe. I mean, for example, you can say Mao did a lot of good things, and you can ignore that he killed 63 million of his own people. You can wear a Che Guevara T-shirt and ignore that he was homophobic. He was, he undertook mass executions. So you can actually, you can swing both ways if you believe in the gray. But if you believe in the black and white, if you believe, for example, that human cell has a nucleus, that is the truth.
Yeah,
there is
that's a fact. Yeah.
or for example, the B form of DNA is double helical. That's the truth. Things of that sort. So I think if we stick to that, then we can very easily demarcate what is opinion and what is truth, i.e. fact. So one need not overlap, and one need not have a very composite definition of truth. But if you do, then what you say is absolutely right. But I think what you say also has a lot of meaning, because you are delving into philosophy, and I believe there is something which is bigger and greater than science. Science is just a stepping stone towards philosophy. And the first thing I tell my students is that, what is the degree you're going to get? Is it degree of science? There's a PhD. Well, it is a doctorate in philosophy. Don't think of yourself as scientist. That's just a stepping stone. Science is a stepping stone. But coming back very quickly to what you said, take home ideas. I think I do repeat. I think we need to completely banish selectivity. Almost, it's become so visceral that we do indulge in it subconsciously. I mean, to give you an example, because I talked of Churchill. So Churchill was an absolute rascal, mass murderer, racist. The guy who is directly responsible for murdering 4.5 million Bengalis during the Bengal famine, as out and out imperialist. He was the guy who first perpetrated the chemical gas attack, almost Faustian attack in the Middle East. He was the one who felt proud that the Tasmanian indigenous population had been wiped out, annihilated by the Australians. So he was an archetypal social Darwinian. And yet, at the dawn of this millennium, when the BBC conducted the greatest Britain of all time, starting from William the Conqueror, who stood at number one? Churchill. So why is it that the Brits still feel that Churchill is the greatest Briton of all time? This is because they believe Churchill won them the war, and they are prepared to overlook all his evils. And one guy who's always a lesson for me is Ambedkar, because there was this book by, I think, Catherine Mayo called what was it called, Mother India, and it came out. In fact, it was really hailed by the Brits as something which is reflects the true Indian society, but it was hated by the Indians, and Gandhi called it the Gutter Inspector's Report. And in fact, Ambedkar was the one who actually, nowadays you would say, well, Ambedkar is indulging in whataboutery. But whataboutery is essential to expose the hypocrisy. You could condemn the recent occurrences, but you have to ask, if you're honest, that, and not selective, that these things have happened before, or why are you ignoring things that have happened before. And this is what Ambedkar said. And if I can remember, I can't remember the exact quote, what he said. He said, people who've read Miss Mayo's book, Mother India, might be left with the impression that all the evils are solely restricted to the Hinduism and the Hindu society. That it is only Hindus who are, wallowing in this mud of primeval thinking, medieval outlook, patriarchy. And while the Muslims have it all rosy, there is nothing wrong in Islam. There is nothing wrong in the way Muslim society conducts itself. Anyone who comes across or goes away with that opinion has to have his eyes checked or something. I'm paraphrasing Ambedkar. So here was Ambedkar, who left no stone unturned in exposing the evils that are there in casteism, in Hinduism. Ambedkar of today would have been completely selective about only highlighting the ills of Hinduism. In fact, Ambedkar changed his religion. He hated Hinduism so much that he became a Buddhist. But the same guy also said that let us not expose only the ills of Hinduism. Let us also expose the ills of other religions. So, you could maybe the editors of Scroll and Wire today or Caravan would boycott Ambedkar and say, look at this whataboutery he's indulging in. Let's downvote Ambedkar's books. He's become a Sanghi or something. But, that's a lesson for me. Someone who's, sorry.
Sorry, Anand. I feel terrible doing this because this is exactly revving up now, and I feel terrible really stopping you here. But we've had the moderators telling us we have 3 minutes to go. Sorry. So, I'll let you continue, Anand. What I'd like each of us to do, and starting with you, Anand, because I really don't want to kind of stop your flow there. 30 seconds, each of us 30 seconds, with one simple suggestion, idea, word of advice, or whatever to anyone watching this show on what, as citizens, as audience, what could we do if we need to be even a small part of ultimately changing that narrative or moving the needle. What can each of us do in the audience? 30 seconds each, and then we'll wind it up. So let's start with you, Anand.
Yeah, I think what any reader or viewer should do is whenever he comes across any instance, whether it is a positive instance or a negative instance, he must think of what is called prior citations or a reference. Has this happened before? Has this good thing happened before? If it has, why aren't we giving credit to the person who did it first? And if it's a bad thing, I condemn it has happened now, but has it happened before? If it has, why are you giving the impression that this is happening for the first time? I think if these two things happen, which is exactly what I meant, bring some more, science, the way science conducts itself into our modern narrative.
And I'm going to pick up on that and continue on that tail. So my one piece of advice, guys, is if you come across any narrative that clearly looks jaded, biased, tinted, whatever it is, social media at the end of the day is a huge equalizer. Please use data, please use facts. There's enough available around. You have Google. Hopefully data reveals will get there, that we'll have 100 pieces of analysis done busting a lot of these myths. Every time you see somebody going and building a false narrative out there, please counter it immediately. You've done your bit in putting the truth out there, whether or not mainstream media allows it, whether it not bubbles up on top or whatever it is. But yeah, let's move a conversation from a right brain opinion conversation to a left brain factual conversation. And that's when India starts getting seen for what it is rather than what it is made out to be. With that, over to Amish and then closing to Manoj. 30 seconds, Amish.
Look, the way I see it, there are 1.38 billion of us. Every single one of us is an ambassador. If we see it from that perspective, we're an ambassador for Mother India, and then we should behave accordingly. So read as much as you can. There are so many positive things that are happening. It's probably one of the best times to be an Indian in the last millennium, right? I was speaking to someone of saying that someone was saying that look how bad things are in India. Then they just answered, you think it was better during Aurangzeb's time? Look where we are now. So it is one of the best times to be an Indian. Speak of the good that is happening in India. Lots of improvements have happened. Poverty has reduced. Casteism has come down. We are united. We have a stable, strong state. There are many good things. criticize what deserves to be criticized as well. There's nothing wrong with that. That criticism should come from love, not from hatred, because we want Mother India to improve. Lastly, if you are an ambassador for Mother India, whichever foreigner, whoever you speak to, realize that you're an ambassador, which means you should speak with manners and respect. Often in the modern day, we have forgotten the value of good manners. Our ancestors used to tell us, Satyam Bruat, Priyam Bruat, Na Bruat Satyam Apriyam. That speak the truth, but speak it with love. And if you cannot speak it with love, then don't speak it. They didn't tell us to lie. They just said, speak it with love. You'll be shocked how much you can get across and convince those in the center, which are 80% of the people, if you just speak with manners and grace.
Perfect. Manoj, over to you. And I'm going to give you the responsibility.
I have to interrupt and say that Amish can never be a member of parliament.
I was going to say that he can certainly become a fantastic ambassador. His tenure in London is surely proving that. I have the hard task of trying to summarize some of these excellent thoughts and ideas. So, firstly, to take on Anand's point about selectivity, I totally agree that we've got to be very clear. Firstly, we've got to be upfront that if we believe in something, then say it and be clear about it, but back it by data and facts. And the work that Anuraag, you guys are doing at Data Reveals is extremely, extremely important to support the sorts of arguments and the supports of views that we have in terms of our positions on world affairs and indeed on explaining issues in India as well. Secondly is that we've got to be very clear. Does the Western narrative matter or it doesn't matter? Let's be clear about that, because we cannot be selective that sometimes it does matter, other times, no, we don't give a monkeys about what's happening in the West and what they think about us. Does it matter or it doesn't matter? Sitting here in the West and talking about India and supporting some of the work that happens in India, I think it does matter. And therefore, you've got to be in the game. And if you're in the game, support it with data, support the media organizations and platforms, like the platforms that Anand writes on and works with, and India Inc. and so on. Support us in that particular journey. Tweet us, write to us, build on these institutions that have already been started as well. And to take Amish's point, is that we have a bigger responsibility now, because 1/4 of the world's workforce within the next 15 years will be Indian. We have a tremendous opportunity to influence the shape of the future shape of the world and that narrative. And we have a huge responsibility, not just for India, but for the world. And I think with that responsibility comes, with that insight comes a lot of responsibility. And going back to my final point, we need to support and build institutions that communicate India's perspectives to the world.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Amish. Thanks, Manoj. Thanks, Anand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Huge pleasure having you guys here. A word of a huge thank you to the audience as well. It's a Saturday morning. It's perhaps midnight for you guys if you're in the UK. It's late in the evening on Friday if you're in the US. You could have been anywhere else and you chose to be here. So thank you guys for it. Enjoy the rest of the sessions and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Wow, that was mind-blowing. I wish we could have gone on longer. Seriously, we barely had time to skim the surface. And that's what makes these panels exciting, isn't it? Well, here is a question for you all at audience. Are you tweeting, cooing right now using your phones? If not, then flip your phones and tag Amish ji, Manoj ji, Anurag ji, and Anand ji, and tell them how you like their discussion. Do it right now. I am waiting. And also, don't forget to use the hashtag Tathya 2021. While India emerges and builds its strength internally, it is important that the world sees a new emerging nation. Discussing how India claims its space in the world It's an exciting erudite panel on New World Order repositioning India in the world's eyes. May I welcome Syed Akbaruddin ji, who we all have seen repositioning a bold new India at United Nations. Accompanying him is Manjeet Kriplani ji, founder chairperson of Gateway House. Gautam Chikamaneji, author, commentator, and VP with Observer Research Foundation, and Nitin Gokhleji, author and senior defense policy expert. Trust me, guys, we sat on the preparatory call for this panel last weekend and some brilliant grand ideas came up. You wouldn't want to miss it.